Planet of the Apes is a movie that rings the bell the first time you watch it. But for whom does that bell toll? Well, according to this movie, it tolls for us. Not unusual for the genre and its customary warnings about humankind's follies. Not to mention how the Cold War of the 60s suggested that doomsday was just around the corner. Duck and cover and beam me up, Scotty. I was 15 years old when this movie opened, and that's kind of the perfect age for this sort of material. I read a lot of science fiction in my adolescence, and that's not a put down, but those are generally the years of a growing awareness of the world around us and the idealism to try and make it better. Television shows like The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits, and of course Star Trek, created stories with real zingers in the tail. And this movie has a biggie. And what's funny is how the audience didn't see it coming, even with the filmmakers dropping hints all along the way. And many of those who didn't see it coming were highbrow critics who generally looked down on science fiction movies. 1968 was the year that changed all that. And this is one of the movies that did it. I'll let you guess the other one. The plot is simple. An experimental spaceship gets lost in space and time and lands on a planet ruled by apes. The first act starts with the spaceship crashing into a lake on what appears to be a barren, desolate world. The astronauts cross the desert landscape to find food and maybe some sign of a civilization. This all climaxes with the brilliantly staged hunt sequence and the reveal of the apes on horseback. The first act works as a great big scary adventure story, and we're hooked right from the beginning. The second act is all trial and error in more ways than one. It's almost impossible not to call them monkey trials, but that's what they are, as they comment on racism and other social diseases, even going so far as to include that old deaf, dumb, and blind gag. But funny enough, it gets a laugh. And the third act ends with the aforementioned zinger in the tail, which has since become iconic. Charlton Heston gives one of his best performances. He's smart and sassy and more than a little bit cynical, and it's a big relief from the Moses and Ben-Hur roles that he was often cast in. Roddy McDowell, Kim Hunter, and Maurice Evans fill out the rest of the cast, and they do wonders with what they have to work with. Which brings us to John Chambers and the makeup he devised for the film. Personally, I think the apes in Kubrick's 2001 were better, but these monkeys had to talk. Thankfully, all the speechifying is interrupted when Heston makes a break for it. After running around Ape City for a while, they finally drop the net on him, and he barks out the now famous, "Take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!" And the audience goes absolutely apeshit. And the moment is buttoned with a thunderous Jerry Goldsmith music cue, which brings us to my man Jerry. I've been a big fan of his work since the early 60s after television viewings of The List of Adrian Messenger and The Prize, and then later when my brother Eddie and I traveled halfway across the Bronx to see the Sand Pebbles. But Jerry Goldsmith's score for Planet of the Apes is one of the landmark scores of 20th century atonal music. And it was one of many film scores that served as a gateway to my own creativity. For me, film scores were daydream machines where you created your own movie inside your own head. And naturally enough, I seem to have the lead in those heroic daydreams. I guess it really is who you know. Director Franklin Schaffner's use of scope, particularly in the first act, is really stunning, and the studios noticed. He went on to do other big-scale movies such as Patton, for which he won an Oscar, and Papillon, which is equally epic. Schaffner had earlier worked with Heston in The Warlord, a movie which did not ring my bell. But it was based on a Broadway play called The Lovers, and that brings me to Leslie Stevens, who wrote the play. He also wrote two of my favorite TV shows of the 60s, Stony Brook and The Outer Limits. And decades later, I had the pleasure of working with Leslie when he hired me to design the stage lighting for his play, Machiavelli. He was a sophisticated, elegant gentleman and a fine raconteur about his many years in the business. The play got good reviews, and we even had a history class attend one of our matinee performances. But there was one review from some two-bit industry rag where the critic attacked Leslie for having the arrogance to direct his own play. And here's the kicker. Leslie was hurt by that review. Here's a man of some achievement, and yet, because of this one review, he has this tremendous moment of self-doubt. And that's what separates the men from the boys. Only the hacks have no self-doubt. And since this is primarily a movie channel, I want to talk about the movie theater. I first saw Planet of the Apes at the great Loew's Capitol Theater in Midtown Manhattan. Since its opening in 1919, the Loew's Capitol has long been New York's premier showcase for MGM movies. In 1962, it was reconverted to accommodate widescreen movies with a large, curving Cinerama screen and deep, plush seating. The entrance to the orchestra section was fronted by a Japanese rock garden with a running stream that doubled as a wishing well. It was a far cry from the neighborhood bijou. I only saw 3 movies there: The Dirty Dozen, Planet of the Apes, and 2001: A Space Odyssey. It closed right after that. But seeing those movies at the Loew's Capitol felt special. It was first run all the way. Now, some of you may have cottoned on to the fact that this channel is a not so thinly disguised autobiography. And while that's true, it's not mine alone. It's also the autobiography of a generation as reflected through the movies we went to see, and how we're all connected to other generations as they now see the same movies, and what the movie-going experience is now like for them. Things are changing rapidly, with the rise of streaming and the slow closing of movie theaters, not to mention the prices. But seeing a movie with an audience is an essential part of its enjoyment. It just doesn't play the same without us, without you and I watching it together. Going to the movies, like the medium itself, is a young person's game, and that's okay. Life intrudes, priorities change. We boomers had our time, and it was fun. And you know, every generation says the same thing. Movies were better back in my day. And to that, I'll just respond with a line from a different movie. The Atlantic Ocean was really something back then. See you around the campus.